The sound of a shovel striking hard earth echoed across the desolate Wyoming landscape as Nora Matthews carefully patted down the soil over her father's grave. April 1876 had brought unseasonable rain, then scorching heat that baked the ground into an unyielding crust. Her hands, once soft from playing the piano in her father's general store, were now blistered and raw. She placed the worn family Bible atop the fresh mound and sank to her knees, her black mourning dress pooling around her like spilled ink against the golden prairie grass. For 3 days, she had kept vigil. 3 days since her father had succumbed to the fever that swept through the small settlement of Whispering Creek. 3 days of digging, of praying, of existing in a strange limbo between her old life and whatever awaited her now. At 22, Nora was alone in a world that showed little mercy to solitary women. The sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the clouds in fiery streaks of amber and crimson. She would need to return to town soon, but something kept her rooted to this spot, as if leaving meant truly accepting that her father was gone forever. The soft rhythm of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until a horse and rider appeared on the ridge. Nora didn't look up, even as the stranger dismounted and approached with measured steps that crunched through the dry grass. "Miss," a deep voice, gentle despite its roughness, broke the silence. "The sun's about to set. It ain't safe for a lady to be out here alone." When she finally raised her eyes, she saw a tall figure silhouetted against the blazing sky. A cowboy, his hat held respectfully in his hands, weathered face half hidden in shadow. His eyes, though clear and intent, studied her with unexpected kindness. "You don't have to stay alone," he said, extending a calloused hand toward her. Nora stared at his outstretched fingers, unsure whether he was offering help up from the ground or something more profound. Either way, she wasn't ready to accept. "I prefer my own company, sir," she replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Please leave me to my grief." The cowboy didn't move. "Name's Vaughn Blackwood. I ride for the Double Creek Ranch." He glanced at the fresh grave. "Your father was a good man. Sold me my first proper pair of boots when I came through these parts 5 years back." Despite herself, Nora felt a flicker of curiosity. "You knew my father." Everyone knew Samuel Matthews. Fair prices, honest dealings. Vaughn shifted his weight. He helped folks when times were hard. Now folks want to return the favor. "There's nothing anyone can do," Nora said flatly, turning back to the grave. "Perhaps not for him, madam, but for you." Vaughn crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "Mrs. Wilkins at the boarding house sent me to find you. She's worried sick. Says you haven't eaten properly in days." "I'm not hungry. Didn't ask if you were hungry. Said you need to eat." The firmness in his tone reminded her of her father, which brought fresh tears to her eyes. Vaughn noticed and softened. "Miss Matthews, night falls quick out here and there's wolves been spotted near town. I can't in good conscience leave you. Your pa would have my hide." A sob escaped before Nora could suppress it. The mention of her father's concern, even hypothetically, broke something inside her. The grief she'd been holding at bay rushed forth like a flash flood. And suddenly she was weeping openly, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. She felt rather than saw Vaughn move closer. He didn't touch her but settled beside her on the ground, a silent presence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. "I don't know what to do," she finally whispered. "The store has debts, the doctor's bills." She trailed off, embarrassed by her candor with a virtual stranger. "One thing at a time, Miss Matthews," Vaughn said. "First, we get you back to town and some food in you. Tomorrow has enough worries of its own." When he offered his hand again, Nora hesitated only briefly before taking it. His grip was firm and warm as he helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly, lightheaded from hunger and exhaustion. "Easy now," he murmured, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "My horse is just over there. Can you ride?" Nora nodded mutely, suddenly too tired to resist his help. She allowed him to lead her to his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding that nickered softly as they approached. "This is Cooper," Vaughn said, patting the horse's neck. "Most even-tempered mount in the territory." With surprising grace for such a tall man, Vaughn cupped his hands to give Nora a boost into the saddle. She gathered her skirts and placed her foot in his linked fingers, grateful for the support as she settled atop the horse. Vaughn collected her father's Bible from the grave and handed it up to her, before taking the reins and leading Cooper away from the small cemetery. As they walked toward town, the vast Wyoming sky opened up above them, a canopy of stars so bright and numerous that they seemed close enough to touch. Nora clutched her father's Bible to her chest and looked back once at the solitary grave, a dark mound now barely visible in the gathering darkness. "He'll rest peaceful here," Vaughn said, following her gaze. "Good view of the mountains." "He always loved the mountains," Nora whispered. "Said they reminded him that some things endure, even when we don't." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "Wise man." They continued in companionable silence, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of Cooper's hooves and the whisper of the night breeze through the tall grass. Despite her grief, Nora felt an unexpected comfort in this stranger's quiet presence. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely alone. The lights of Whispering Creek appeared in the distance, a handful of golden specks in the vast darkness. As they approached the small settlement, Nora could make out the silhouette of her father's general store, dark and shuttered, and next to it, the warm glow of Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house. "The whole town came looking for you when you didn't return after sundown," Vaughn mentioned as they neared the main street. "Sheriff Holloway organized search parties. Would have been out there myself sooner if I hadn't been delivering cattle to Fort Laramie." Nora felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't mean to worry anyone. I just couldn't leave him." "No need to explain," Vaughn replied. "Grief has its own timeline." When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Wilkins burst through the door before Vaughn could even help Nora dismount. The plump widow rushed forward, her gray hair escaping its usual tight bun, worry etched across her face. "Nora Matthews, you scared 10 years off my life." She reached up to help Nora down from the horse. "Come inside this instant. I've kept stew warm and there's fresh bread." Nora allowed herself to be guided toward the house, but paused to look back at Vaughn. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." He tipped his hat, a small smile softening his weathered features. "Just Vaughn, madam, and you're welcome." He turned to leave but added, "I'll stop by tomorrow to see how you're faring, if that's all right." Before Nora could respond, Mrs. Wilkins answered for her. "That's more than all right, Mr. Blackwood. This girl needs friends now more than ever." She ushered Nora inside, still talking. "Such a gentleman, that one. Not like some of the ruffians that pass through here." The boarding house was warm and smelled of beef stew and freshly baked bread. Mrs. Wilkins led Nora to the kitchen and sat her down at the large wooden table before bustling about, filling a bowl with steaming stew and cutting thick slices of bread. "Eat," she commanded, placing the food before Nora. "Then bath and bed. We'll sort everything else tomorrow." Too exhausted to argue, Nora ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as her body reminded her how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. As she ate, Mrs. Wilkins chatted, filling the silence with news of the town and gentle reminiscences about Samuel Matthews. "Your father was the backbone of this community," Mrs. Wilkins said, refilling Nora's cup with hot tea. Always the first to help when someone fell on hard times. Remember when the Jenkins family lost their farm in that fire? Samuel gave them credit at the store for 6 months until they got back on their feet. Nora nodded, throat tight with emotion. He believed in people. That he did. Mrs. Wilkins patted Nora's hand. And people believed in him. That's why you won't be facing this alone, dear. This town takes care of its own. After her meal, Nora bathed in the copper tub Mrs. Wilkins had prepared, scrubbing away days of dirt and dried tears. The hot water soothed her aching muscles, and by the time she slipped into the clean nightgown Mrs. Wilkins had laid out, exhaustion overwhelmed her. She barely remembered crawling into bed before sleep claimed her, deep and dreamless. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee and bacon. Nora woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous days came rushing back. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in her chest, but somehow more manageable in the light of day. She dressed quickly in one of the few dresses she'd brought to the boarding house days earlier when her father first fell ill. The black mourning dress needed washing after her vigil at the grave. Mrs. Wilkins had already laid out breakfast when Nora came downstairs. "There she is," the older woman said warmly. "Some color back in your cheeks, I see. Eat up now. You've got visitors waiting in the parlor." "Visitors?" Nora asked, suddenly apprehensive. "Sheriff Holloway and Mr. Parker from the bank," Mrs. Wilkins explained, her expression sobering. "They want to discuss your father's affairs. I told them they could wait until you'd had breakfast." Nora's appetite vanished, but she forced herself to eat a few bites of eggs and toast. Her father's affairs, the store, the outstanding debts, the future she hadn't yet allowed herself to contemplate. With a deep breath, she steeled herself and headed for the parlor. Sheriff Holloway rose when she entered, his weathered face grave beneath his silver mustache. Mr. Parker remained seated, his ledger already open on his lap. The bank manager's thin face betrayed no emotion, but his fingers tapped impatiently against the leather cover of his book. "Miss Matthews," the sheriff began, "first, please accept my deepest condolences. Your father was one of the finest men I've known." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora replied, taking a seat across from them. Mr. Parker cleared his throat. "While I also extend my sympathies, Miss Matthews, there are practical matters that require immediate attention." He adjusted his spectacles and consulted his ledger. "Your father's store has outstanding loans of considerable sum. Additionally, there are unpaid invoices from suppliers in Cheyenne and Denver." Nora's stomach clenched. "How much?" "The total comes to just over $2,000. The amount staggered her. She knew the store had been struggling after the harsh winter had kept customers away, but she hadn't realized the depth of their financial troubles. The store itself and inventory would cover perhaps half that amount if sold quickly. Parker continued dispassionately. "Sold." Nora echoed, her voice barely audible. Sheriff Holloway shot Parker a disapproving look. "What Mr. Parker means to say is that there are options to consider. No decisions need to be made today." "The bank cannot extend indefinite patience," Parker countered. "Unless Miss Matthews can produce the funds or find a buyer willing to assume the debts along with the business. Foreclosure proceedings will begin within the month." A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Wilkins hurried to answer it, and moments later, Vaughn Blackwood appeared in the parlor doorway, hat in hand. His presence was unexpected but somehow steadying. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, nodding respectfully to the room. "I promised Miss Matthews I'd check on her today." "Blackwood," Sheriff Holloway acknowledged with a nod. "We're discussing Samuel's affairs." Vaughn's eyes flicked to the banker's open ledger, then to Nora's pale face. "Perhaps I should come back later." "No," Nora said quickly, surprising herself. "Please stay, Mr. Blackwood." Parker frowned at the interruption but continued briskly. "As I was saying, the outstanding debts must be addressed. Unless Miss Matthews has family with resources she can call upon." Nora shook her head. "There's just me now." "Then I see three options," Parker said, ticking them off on his fingers. 1. Find the money to pay the debts. 2. Sell the store quickly and use the proceeds to pay what you can, though this would still leave you with significant debt. Or 3. Declare bankruptcy and forfeit all assets. The walls seemed to close in around Nora. Her father had built that store from nothing when Whispering Creek was barely more than a stagecoach stop. It was his legacy, and the thought of losing it felt like losing him all over again. "There's a fourth option," Vaughn said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. Miss Matthews could continue running the store. With proper management, it could generate enough income to pay off the debts over time. Parker scoffed. A single woman running a business? Preposterous. Besides, the existing debts require immediate attention. "What if someone stood as guarantor for the debts?" Vaughn pressed. "Would the bank extend the terms then?" The banker studied Vaughn skeptically. "That would depend on the guarantor's assets and standing. Are you volunteering, Mr. Blackwood?" A tense silence filled the room. Nora stared at Vaughn, scarcely daring to breathe. They were virtual strangers, and yet here he was, potentially offering to risk his own financial security for her. "I have some savings," Vaughn said carefully, "and my standing with Double Creek Ranch gives me credit. I'd need to speak with my employer, but I believe an arrangement could be made." "Vaughn," Nora began, "I couldn't possibly. It's what your father would have done for any of us," he interrupted gently. Sheriff Holloway stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "It's not a bad idea, Parker. Matthew's store is essential to this town. Giving his daughter a chance to keep it running serves everyone's interests." Parker looked unconvinced but made a notation in his ledger. "I would need formal documentation of any guarantor arrangement, plus an initial payment of at least $200 to demonstrate good faith." $200. Nora's heart sank. Even that reduced amount was far beyond her means. "I can provide that," came a new voice from the doorway. They all turned to see Nancy Whitcomb, the schoolteacher, standing with Mrs. Wilkins. Nancy stepped forward, her normally stern face softened with compassion. "Samuel paid for the schoolhouse repairs last winter when the town council dragged their feet," she explained. "He refused reimbursement when the funds finally came through. I've been holding that money aside, waiting for a chance to repay his kindness." Nora felt tears welling in her eyes. "Miss Whitcomb, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep that store open," Nancy replied simply. "Our children need books and supplies, and the nearest alternative is 30 miles away in Clearwater." Mr. Parker closed his ledger with a snap. "Very well. I'll draw up the necessary papers. Assuming Mr. Blackwood's credentials prove satisfactory, Miss Matthews will have 6 months to demonstrate the store's viability before further action is considered." After the banker and sheriff departed, Nora sat in stunned silence. The reprieve was temporary, the challenge ahead enormous, but for the first time since her father fell ill, a faint glimmer of hope flickered within her. "Thank you," she said finally, looking between Vaughn and Nancy. "Both of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "You can start by getting that store open again," Nancy said practically. "I need to order new primers before the school term begins." After the schoolteacher left, Vaughn remained, standing awkwardly by the parlor door. "I meant what I said, Miss Matthews. I'll stand as guarantor. The foreman at Double Creek will vouch for me with the bank." "Why?" Nora asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Vaughn was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. 6 years ago, I rode into this territory with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. I'd lost my family in Kansas to fever, much like you lost your father. I was angry at the world, drinking too much, picking fights. He paused, a shadow crossing his face. One night, I got thrown through your father's store window during a brawl. Instead of having me arrested, he gave me a place to sleep it off and offered me a job stocking shelves until I could pay for the damages. I don't remember that, Nora said, surprised. You were away at school in Denver then, but your father, he saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. He helped me get the position at Double Creek. Vaughn met her eyes directly. So you see, Miss Matthews, I'm not doing this for someone I barely know. I'm repaying a debt to the man who changed my life. His words touched something deep within Nora, a connection to her father that soothed the ragged edges of her grief. Then I accept your help, Mr. Blackwood, though I intend to make this work so that your guarantee never becomes necessary. I don't doubt it for a moment, he replied with a small smile. Shall we go see about opening that store? The walk to Matthew's general store was short but emotionally challenging for Nora. She hadn't been inside since before her father's final illness. The building stood silent and dark, a closed sign hanging crookedly in the window. Nora's hands trembled slightly as she fitted the key into the lock. The door swung open with a familiar creak, releasing the mingled scents of coffee beans, leather, tobacco, and the faint mustiness of undisturbed cloth goods. She stepped inside, memories washing over her like a physical force. Her father behind the counter, carefully weighing flour for Mrs. Johnson's weekly order. Her childhood self perched on a stool, practicing her sums by adding up columns in the ledger. The Christmas when they stayed open late so the miners from the hills could buy gifts before heading home to their families. You all right? Vaughn asked quietly, standing respectfully by the door. Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She moved through the store, running her fingers over the familiar countertops, straightening items that had been left askew when they'd closed hurriedly after her father collapsed. It needs a good cleaning, she said finally, her practical nature asserting itself through the emotion. And inventory. I'll need to see what's in stock and what needs to be ordered. I can help, Vaughn offered. Before I worked at Double Creek, I did some clerking for your father. I remember the system. Together, they opened windows to air out the staleness, dusted shelves, and began a careful inventory of the store's contents. Vaughn proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the business, explaining the ordering system her father had used and pointing out which suppliers had been reliable. As they worked side by side, Nora found herself studying Vaughn when he wasn't looking. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun. His hands were strong and capable, moving with deliberate care as he counted inventory and made notes in a small leather-bound notebook. By mid-afternoon, word had spread through the small town that Matthew's general store would soon reopen. Several people stopped by to offer condolences and support, many bringing food or offering help. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery brought fresh bread and promised to spread the word. Old Jim Harris, the blacksmith, fixed a loose hinge on the back door without being asked. Even the Reverend Jenkins came by, offering to announce the store's reopening during Sunday's service. See, Vaughn said as they watched the Reverend leave. Your father touched many lives here. These folks want to see you succeed. Nora felt overwhelmed by the community's response. I never realized. Your father wasn't one to boast about his good deeds, Vaughn replied, but people remember kindness, especially in hard places like this. As evening approached, they finished the inventory and Nora locked up the store, feeling both exhausted and oddly invigorated. They walked back toward the boarding house in the golden light of sunset. "Will you be able to open tomorrow?" Vaughn asked. "Yes," Nora decided. "The shelves are a bit bare in places, but there's enough to start. I can place orders as we go. I'll stop by in the morning to help you set up before I head to the ranch." Vaughn hesitated, then added, "If you'd like." Nora looked up at him, noticing the uncertainty in his expression. For all his confidence in helping her with the store, there was a vulnerability about him that she found unexpectedly touching. "I would appreciate that very much," she said sincerely. When they reached the boarding house, Vaughn tipped his hat. "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Matthews." "Nora," she corrected him impulsively. "If we're to be business associates of sorts, you should call me Nora." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features. "Nora," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Good night, then, Nora." As she watched him walk away, Nora felt a curious lightness in her chest, not happiness exactly, but perhaps the first step away from despair. Her father was gone, but she was not alone. Not anymore. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Nora rose early, determined to make her first day running Matthews General Store a success. She dressed carefully in a practical blue skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her dark hair into a neat bun. After a quick breakfast at the boarding house, she made her way to the store, surprised to find Vaughn already waiting outside. "You're early," she remarked, unlocking the door. "Ranching hours," he explained with a shrug. "Up before the sun every day." Together, they prepared the store for opening, sweeping the porch, polishing the windows until they gleamed, arranging displays to make the somewhat depleted inventory look more abundant. Vaughn brought in a fresh pot of coffee from the hotel across the street, setting it on the small stove in the corner where her father had always kept coffee brewing for customers. "Something smells good in here," came a voice from the doorway. Sheriff Holloway strode in, followed by two of his deputies. "Glad to see Matthews open again. We've been making do with that sorry excuse for coffee at the jailhouse." "First cups are on the house, Sheriff," Nora offered, falling naturally into the shopkeeper's role. As the lawmen sipped their coffee and browsed the merchandise, other townspeople began arriving, curious at first, then delighted to find the store operational again. By mid-morning, Nora had made several sales and taken orders for items not currently in stock. Vaughn stayed longer than he'd planned, helping with the unexpected rush of customers and offering quiet guidance when Nora wasn't sure about pricing or procedures. His presence was reassuring, and Nora found herself glancing his way whenever a challenging situation arose, drawing confidence from his steady support. "I should get to the ranch," he said eventually, as the morning crowd thinned. "The foreman will be wondering where I am." "Of course," Nora replied, suddenly anxious at the thought of managing alone. "Thank you for everything." Vaughn lingered by the door. "You're doing fine, you know, better than fine. Your father would be proud." The simple words warmed her more than she expected. Will you come by tomorrow?" she asked hesitantly. "Try to keep me away," he answered with a smile that reached his eyes. After Vaughn left, Nora continued through her first day as proprietor of Matthews General Store. There were moments of uncertainty and a few mistakes. She undercharged Mrs. Wilson for a bolt of calico and had to consult her father's ledger to remember how much credit to extend to the Cooper family, but overall, the day passed successfully. By closing time, Nora was exhausted but satisfied. She'd made enough in sales to place a modest order with the Denver supplier, and the townspeople's warm response had bolstered her confidence. As she locked up and headed back to the boarding house, She felt her father's presence like a gentle hand on her shoulder. He would indeed be proud, she thought. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Nora would open the store early, and Vaughn would stop by before heading to the ranch, often bringing fresh eggs or milk from the Double Creek kitchens. Sometimes he'd return in the evenings to help her balance the day's accounts or restock shelves. On Sundays, when the store was closed, he'd escort her to church and afterward join her for dinner at the boarding house. Their friendship grew naturally, built on shared work and quiet conversations. Nora learned that Vaughn had been born in Missouri, that he'd fought briefly for the Union during the final year of the war when he was barely 18, that he could play the harmonica but only knew 3 songs. In turn, she told him about her schooling in Denver, her love of books, her mother who had died when Nora was just 12. The townsfolk watched their burgeoning friendship with approving eyes. Mrs. Wilkins took to setting an extra place at dinner without being asked whenever Vaughn appeared at the door. Sheriff Holloway would pointedly include both their names when extending invitations to town gatherings. Even Mr. Parker from the bank seemed to soften his stance on the store's viability after seeing Vaughn's regular involvement. One evening in late May, as they sat on the boarding house porch after dinner, Vaughn mentioned that the annual spring cattle drive to Cheyenne would be starting the following week. "I'll be gone for about 3 weeks," he said, watching her carefully for her reaction. Nora felt a surprising pang at the news. 3 weeks? That's quite a while. It's good money, Vaughn explained. And the Double Creek hands count on me to help negotiate fair prices with the buyers. Of course, Nora said quickly, embarrassed by her transparent disappointment. The store will be fine. Business has been steady and the new shipment from Denver arrives tomorrow. Vaughn studied her in the fading light, his expression thoughtful. I wasn't worried about the store, Nora. I was thinking I might miss our conversations. The simple admission hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Nora felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety about managing the store alone. I might miss them too, she admitted softly. Vaughn reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. His touch was gentle, almost tentative, as if he expected her to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers curled around hers more confidently. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, and the first stars appeared overhead. Nora was acutely aware of his calloused thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand, of the steady sound of his breathing, of the way the evening breeze carried the clean scent of his soap. I should go, he said eventually, reluctantly releasing her hand. Early start tomorrow. Will you come by before you leave for Cheyenne? Nora asked. First thing Monday morning, he promised, rising from his chair. He hesitated, then added, maybe when I get back we could go on a proper outing. There's a spot up in the foothills where the wildflowers bloom this time of year. Makes for a nice picnic. Nora smiled, warmth spreading through her at the invitation. I'd like that very much. Vaughn's answering smile was bright even in the gathering darkness. Then it's a date. He tipped his hat and stepped off the porch, his tall figure soon disappearing down the moonlit street. As promised, Vaughn stopped by the store early Monday morning before joining the cattle drive. He helped Nora unpack the Denver shipment, then presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Something to remember me by, he said with uncharacteristic shyness. Inside was a small wooden carving of a meadowlark, exquisitely detailed despite its simplicity. Did you make this? Nora asked, running her finger over the smooth wood. Vaughn nodded. Whittling passes the time on long watches. Meadowlarks always remind me of you, elegant but sturdy enough for Wyoming winters. The thoughtful gift touched Nora deeply. It's beautiful, thank you. When it came time for him to leave, they stood awkwardly at the store entrance, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye. Finally, Vaughn took her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips. "Take care of yourself, Nora Matthews. I'll be back before you know it." She watched him mount his horse and ride toward the Double Creek outfit assembling at the edge of town. Just before he disappeared from view, he turned in his saddle and raised his hand in farewell. Nora waved back, already counting the days until his return. The 3 weeks of Vaughn's absence passed more slowly than Nora anticipated. She threw herself into the store, extending hours and expanding inventory. Thanks to her father's meticulous record-keeping and her own natural aptitude for business, Matthews' general store began to thrive again. She paid the first installment on her father's debt ahead of schedule, earning a grudging nod of approval from Mr. Parker. Yet despite her success, Nora found herself watching the door whenever it opened, hoping to see Vaughn's tall figure. She kept the wooden meadowlark on the counter beside the cash register, a constant reminder of his promise to return. News of the cattle drive reached town periodically through telegraph messages and returning travelers. The Double Creek herd had made good time to Cheyenne, the messages said, and prices were higher than expected due to increased demand from eastern markets. On the first day of June, Nora was sorting a shipment of fabric when the store door opened, bringing with it a gust of warm air and the jingling of spurs. She looked up, her heart leaping when she recognized Vaughn's broad-shouldered silhouette against the bright sunlight. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the delight from her voice. Vaughn stepped into the store and Nora's smile faltered. His face was bruised, a healing cut above his right eye, his left arm held stiffly at his side. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying around the counter. "Bar fight in Cheyenne," he explained grimly. "Some Kansas drovers took issue with Wyoming boys getting better prices. Got ugly fast. Are you all right?" Nora reached toward his injured arm, then stopped herself, uncertain. "Nothing broken, just bruised ribs and wounded pride." His attempt at a reassuring smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Foreman sent me home early while the others finish up the paperwork." Nora turned the store sign to closed and led Vaughn to the small back room where her father had kept his office. She insisted on examining his injuries, despite his protests that he was fine. "These bandages need changing," she said firmly, noting the blood seeping through the cloth wrapped around his ribs. "Sit down and take off your shirt." Vaughn raised an eyebrow at her commanding tone but complied, wincing as he carefully removed his shirt. The sight of his bare torso, mottled with purple bruises across his left side, made Nora gasp softly. "Those Kansas boys must have been armed with sledgehammers," she murmured, gathering fresh bandages and the bottle of medicinal whiskey her father had kept for emergencies. "5 against 1 makes for poor odds," Vaughn admitted, hissing through his teeth as she began cleaning a deep cut along his ribs. "5 against 1 isn't a fight, it's an ambush," Nora said indignantly, her gentle hands belying her angry tone. As she tended his wounds, Nora was acutely aware of his proximity, of the lean muscle beneath her fingertips, of his steady gaze following her every movement. The intimacy of the situation struck her suddenly, and she felt heat rising to her cheeks. "There," she said, securing the last bandage. "That should be better." "Thank you," Vaughn said quietly. "Not just for this, for caring that I came back." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a boundary crossed, an understanding reached without words. Vaughn lifted his hand to her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with exquisite gentleness. "I thought about you every day," he confessed, his voice low and rough with emotion. "About your smile. About that picnic I promised you." "I thought about you too," Nora whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. The distance between them seemed to vanish as Vaughn leaned forward, his intent clear in his eyes. Nora closed her eyes as his lips met hers, soft and questioning at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His hand cradled the back of her neck, drawing her closer, deepening the kiss until Nora felt dizzy with the sensation. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first time I saw you at your father's grave," he admitted. "Even then?" Nora asked, surprised. "Even then?" Vaughn smiled, his thumb brushing her lower lip, though I had the good sense not to act on it at the time. A knock at the store door interrupted the moment. Nora reluctantly pulled away, helping Vaughn back into his shirt before going to see who was there. It was Nancy Whitcomb, the schoolteacher, looking for primer books for the summer reading program. "I see the cattle drive returned early," Nancy observed with a knowing glance as Vaughn emerged from the back room, somewhat disheveled. "Just me," Vaughn clarified. "Had a bit of trouble in Cheyenne." Nancy's sharp eyes took in his injuries and Nora's flushed cheeks. "Well, it seems you're in good hands now." To Nora she added, "I can come back later if you're occupied." "No, no," Nora insisted, professional demeanor reasserting itself. "The primers came in yesterday. Let me get them for you." As Nora helped the schoolteacher, Vaughn excused himself, promising to return the next day. "That picnic is still on offer," he said quietly as he left, "when you think I'm healed enough to make the ride." For the next week, Vaughn visited the store daily, sometimes helping with customers, sometimes simply sitting by the stove drinking coffee and watching Nora work. His ribs healed slowly but steadily, and by the following Sunday he declared himself fit enough for their long-delayed picnic. They set out early, Vaughn on Cooper and Nora on a gentle mare borrowed from Double Creek Ranch. The June morning was perfect clear blue skies, a gentle breeze and wildflowers painting the prairie in swathes of purple, yellow, and white. Vaughn led her up into the foothills, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. After an hour's ride, they emerged into a small meadow nestled against a rocky outcropping. A crystal-clear stream bubbled along one edge, and the grass was thick with blue columbine and scarlet paintbrush. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "Discovered it my first year with Double Creek," Vaughn said, helping her dismount. "I come here sometimes when I need to think or just be away from everything for a while." They spread a blanket beneath a large pine tree and unpacked the lunch Mrs. Wilkins had prepared for them: fried chicken, fresh bread, apple tarts, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, Vaughn told stories of the cattle drive, carefully edited to exclude the more dangerous details, while Nora shared news of the town in his absence. After lunch, they walked along the stream, gathering wildflowers and skipping stones across the clear water. Vaughn seemed more relaxed than Nora had ever seen him, laughing easily and speaking more freely about his past. "Did you ever think of having your own ranch?" Nora asked as they sat on a fallen log, watching a pair of eagles circle overhead. Vaughn considered the question. "Used to dream of it. Saved every penny for years. Then your father got sick and—" He trailed off, looking at her uncertainly. "And you used your savings to help me keep the store," Nora finished, the realization dawning. "Vaughn, I had no idea. You should have told me," he shrugged, embarrassed. "It was my choice." Some things matter more than others. The simple statement held such weight that Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "You gave up your dream for me." "No," Vaughn said firmly, taking her hand. "I chose a different dream, a better one." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. "I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment. He unwrapped it to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a small pearl. It was my mother's, not fancy but honest like she was. Nora's breath caught as Vaughn slid from the log to one knee before her, the ring held between his fingers. Nora Matthews, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Time seemed to stand still in the quiet meadow. Nora looked at the man kneeling before her, this strong, gentle cowboy who had found her at her lowest point and lifted her up without expecting anything in return. The man who had sacrificed his own dreams to protect hers. The man she had, against all expectations, come to love deeply. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Vaughn Blackwood, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Vaughn rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words could not express. They returned to Whispering Creek late that afternoon, riding side by side, hands occasionally reaching across the space between their horses to touch, to reassure themselves that this newfound happiness was real. The silver ring on Nora's finger caught the sunlight, sending tiny flashes of brilliance into the air like omens of the bright future ahead. News of their engagement spread through the small town with remarkable speed. Mrs. Wilkins cried happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding feast. Sheriff Holloway offered the use of the town hall for the ceremony. Nancy Whitcomb promised to have her students sing at the service, even Mr. Parker from the bank offered congratulations, along with a wedding gift of sorts, a restructuring of Samuel Matthews' debt that would make it more manageable for the young couple. "Consider it an investment in Whispering Creek's future," he said with uncharacteristic sentiment. They set the wedding date for August, giving them time to prepare and for the rest of the Double Creek hands to return from Cheyenne. Vaughn moved his few possessions from the ranch bunkhouse to a small room at the boarding house, though Mrs. Wilkins enforced strict propriety by keeping them on opposite ends of the building. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Vaughn and Nora settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked together at the store during the day, with Vaughn handling the heavy lifting and deliveries, while Nora managed the books and customer relations. In the evenings, they would sit on the boarding house porch planning their future, their dreams no longer separate but beautifully intertwined. "We could live above the store," Nora suggested one evening. "There's plenty of room and it would save the walk in bad weather." "And when we have children?" Vaughn asked, his eyes warm at the thought. Nora blushed but smiled at the image his words conjured. "We could expand. The empty lot next door has been for sale for years." They discussed children, often Vaughn hoping for a daughter with Nora's dark eyes and quick mind, Nora imagining a son with Vaughn's steady nature and kind heart. These conversations, full of hope and gentle teasing, bound them closer with each passing day. As August approached, preparations for the wedding intensified. Nora ordered fabric from Denver and enlisted Nancy Whitcomb's help in creating a simple but elegant wedding dress. Vaughn saved up for a proper suit, enduring good-natured ribbing from his fellow ranch hands about trading his chaps for chapel clothes. 2 weeks before the wedding, Vaughn rode out to his special meadow alone and returned with wildflowers to plant behind the store. "So you'll always have a piece of our meadow close by," he explained as he carefully transferred the columbine and paintbrush to a small garden plot. The gesture touched Nora deeply. That evening, as they sat together on the boarding house porch watching the sunset, she rested her head against his shoulder and felt a profound sense of peace. The grief of losing her father would never fully disappear, but life had given her a new beginning, a love she hadn't expected but now couldn't imagine living without. Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the late summer sky a brilliant blue above Whispering Creek. The town hall had been transformed with wildflowers and ribbons, every pew filled with townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area. Sheriff Holloway proudly escorted Nora down the aisle in her father's place, his usual gruff demeanor softened by the occasion. Vaughn waited at the altar, tall and handsome in his new suit, his eyes never leaving Nora as she walked toward him. When she reached his side and placed her hand in his, he whispered, "You're even more beautiful than I dreamed." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Jenkins spoke of new beginnings and enduring love, of the community that had brought them together and would support them through the years ahead. As they exchanged vows and rings, Nora thought of her father, how he would have approved of Vaughn, how he might be watching from somewhere beyond, blessing their union. The celebration afterwards spilled out from the town hall into the main street. Tables laden with food stretched along the boardwalk, fiddle music filled the air, and lanterns cast a golden glow as dusk fell. Vaughn and Nora danced under the stars, surrounded by friends who had become family, their joy reflected in every face around them. Later that night, as they stood alone on the porch of the store, their store now, and their home above it, Vaughn wrapped his arms around Nora from behind, both of them gazing up at the vast Wyoming sky. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. Nora turned in his embrace, looking up at the face that had become dearer to her than any other. "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her then, a promise sealed beneath the watchful stars, as Whispering Creek settled into peaceful slumber around them. 5 years passed, each season bringing new joys and challenges for Vaughn and Nora Blackwood. Matthews' General Store, now officially Blackwood's, prospered under their joint management. The empty lot next door had indeed been purchased and transformed into an extension of the store, with a section dedicated to books and school supplies that became Nora's special project. Their home above the store expanded as well, accommodating the growth of their family. Their firstborn, Samuel Vaughn Blackwood, arrived just 10 months after their wedding, a strong, serious boy with his father's steady gaze and his mother's quick mind. 2 years later came Elizabeth Rose, a spirited girl whose laughter filled the rooms like music. Vaughn continued to work part-time for Double Creek Ranch, his experience and fair-mindedness making him invaluable during cattle drives and negotiations with buyers. But his primary focus remained the store and his growing family. He built a workshop behind the store where he created wooden toys for his children and fine furniture that sold for good prices to wealthy travelers passing through. Nora balanced motherhood with business acumen, expanding their inventory to include specialty items ordered from as far away as New York and San Francisco. Her correspondence with suppliers and customers helped Whispering Creek maintain connections to the wider world, bringing new ideas and opportunities to the small frontier town. Together, they paid off Samuel Matthews' debts in full, 3 years ahead of schedule. Mr. Parker from the bank, now a regular Sunday dinner guest at their home, presented them with the final receipt in a frame, which they hung proudly behind the store counter. The meadow in the foothills remained their special place. They took the children there for picnics in summer, teaching Samuel to fish in the stream and showing Elizabeth how to make flower crowns from columbine and paintbrush. On their wedding anniversary each year, Vaughn and Nora would ride there alone, renewing their connection to the place where he had proposed and where they had first envisioned their shared future. One crisp October morning in 1881, Nora stood at her father's grave, no longer alone but surrounded by family. Samuel, now 4 years old, solemnly placed a small bunch of late wildflowers on the well-tended mound while 2-year-old Elizabeth clung to her father's hand, not quite understanding the significance of the place, but sensing its importance. "Grandfather was a good man," Samuel declared with the certainty of a child repeating often-heard words. "The best," Vaughn agreed, his free arm around Nora's shoulders. "He brought your mother and me together in a way." Nora leaned into her husband's embrace, remembering that desolate day 5 years earlier when she had sat alone beside this fresh grave, lost in grief and uncertainty. She thought of Vaughn approaching through the golden evening light, offering his hand and those life-changing words, "You don't have to stay alone." She hadn't known then how profoundly those simple words would alter her life's course, how the compassion of a passing cowboy would blossom into a love that sustained and enriched her beyond all expectation. "Look, Mama!" Elizabeth's excited voice broke into her thoughts. The little girl pointed to a meadowlark perched on a nearby stone, its sweet call carrying clearly in the still morning air. "It's singing for Grandfather," Samuel decided, his young face solemn with the conviction that his grandfather somehow lived on in the beauty around them. "I think you're right," Nora said softly, watching the bird's golden breast catch the sunlight as it warbled its cheerful song. Vaughn's arms tightened around her, and she knew he was remembering too the carved meadowlark he had given her before that first cattle drive. The bird, he said, reminded him of her. "Ready to head back?" he asked after a while, his voice gentle. "Store opens in an hour." Nora nodded, taking one last look at her father's grave, now settled into the landscape and marked with a proper headstone that bore the words Samuel Matthews, beloved father, respected friend, pillar of Whispering Creek. "I think he would be pleased," she said as they walked toward their horses. "With how everything turned out." "More than pleased," Vaughn replied, lifting Elizabeth onto his saddle before helping Samuel mount the gentle pony they had recently acquired for the boy. "He'd be proud of the woman you've become, of the life you've built." "The life we've built," Nora corrected, accepting his boost onto her mare. As they rode back toward town, the children chattering excitedly about the day ahead, Nora looked at Vaughn, her husband, her partner, her unexpected blessing. The morning sun caught the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples, the laugh lines deepening around his eyes, the strong hands that had supported her through joy and sorrow alike. She thought of the young woman she had been, sitting broken beside a fresh grave, and the man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to voice. How far they had come from that first meeting, how rich their life together had grown. Whispering Creek appeared before them, no longer just a small frontier settlement but home in the deepest sense of the word. Their store stood at its heart, windows gleaming in the morning light, the garden of wildflowers behind it, a splash of vibrant color against the weathered boards. As they approached, townspeople called out greetings. Sheriff Holloway, gray-haired now but still straight-backed on his porch, Nancy Whitcomb hurrying toward the schoolhouse with an armful of books, Mrs. Wilkins emerging from the boarding house to wave at the children. "Race you to the store." Samuel called to his sister, nudging his pony forward despite his mother's cautioning words to be careful. Vaughn laughed, the sound warm and familiar as the autumn sunlight. "Let them go," he said to Nora. "They know the way home. Home." The word resonated in Nora's heart as she watched her children ride ahead, their small figures silhouetted against the backdrop of the town that had embraced them all. She turned to find Vaughn watching her, his eyes filled with the same love and wonder that had sustained them through 5 years of marriage. "What are you thinking?" he asked, guiding his horse closer to hers. "That I'm grateful," Nora replied simply. "For that day when you found me. For every day since." Vaughn reached across the space between them, taking her hand as they rode side by side into the future they continued to build together. "As am I, Nora Blackwood. As am I." And so they returned to their store, their children, their life, the cowboy who had offered friendship when it was most needed, and the woman who had found the courage to accept it. Their story, begun in grief beside a fresh grave, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the healing power of love and the promise of new beginnings, even in the most unexpected places. As the morning sun climbed higher over Whispering Creek, casting its golden light over the town and the endless Wyoming prairie beyond, Vaughn and Nora Blackwood stepped into their store hand in hand, ready to greet whatever the day might bring, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together.